The foreclosure notice trembles in weathered hands as the blizzard howls outside. A symphony of destruction matching the storm raging within. 5 generations of sweat and sacrifice reduced to black ink on white paper. 60 days until it all disappears. They say the land remembers. It remembers the families who bled for it, who starved during the Dust Bowl rather than abandon it, who passed it down like a sacred trust. Now corporations circle like vultures, waiting for good men to fall. When the gunshot echoes through the howling wind, it's not just another sound in the storm, it's the beginning of a war. A war most don't even realize is being fought across America's heartland, where family legacies are being systematically erased from the soil that bore them. Sometimes salvation arrives in strange forms. Sometimes the person you save is the one person who might save everything you love. And sometimes, the most dangerous truth is the one that's been hiding in plain sight all along. The foreclosure notice trembled in Jackson Hayes' weathered hands. The black ink stark against the white paper, despite the dim light of his kitchen. 60 days. After 5 generations of Hayes farmers who had survived the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, and the farm crisis of the 1980s. It would be on his watch that the legacy ended. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Damn it," he muttered, tossing the paper onto the pile of bills that had accumulated on his oak table, a table his grandfather had crafted from trees harvested on this very land. He ran his calloused fingers through his salt and pepper hair, the premature gray a testament to the stress of the past 3 years. Outside, the Wisconsin winter howled its fury, the first major blizzard of the season arriving earlier than forecast. The weathered farmhouse creaked under the assault, but Jackson knew it would stand. It always had. Whether he'd still own it when spring planting season arrived was another matter entirely. His phone buzzed, a text from his daughter, Sarah at UW-Madison. "Dad, you okay with the storm? News says it's hitting Clearwater hard." Jackson managed a small smile. 20-year-old Sarah, worrying about him instead of the other way around. He'd raised her right, at least. "All good, kiddo. Batten down the hatches. Focus on your exams." He set the phone down and moved to the window. The snow was falling in thick sheets now, the barn barely visible through the white curtain. His small herd of cattle would be fine in the reinforced shelter he'd built 2 summers ago. The winter wheat was dormant under a protective layer of snow. The tractors and equipment were secured. Everything was prepared, as it always was on Hayes Farm. Jackson had learned preparedness first from his father, then from the Army during his tours in Iraq. Control what you can control. Be ready for what you can't. But no amount of preparation could counter the reality of 3 consecutive years of drought, followed by early frost that had decimated his corn crop, or the property tax increases that seemed specifically designed to pressure small farmers, or the market manipulation that kept grain prices artificially low while input costs soared. Jackson pulled on his heavy canvas barn coat and insulated boots. Storm or no storm, evening chores waited for no man. Just as he reached for the door, the crack of what sounded like a gunshot echoed through the howling wind. He froze. Hunting season was over, and no sane person would be out in this weather anyway. He listened intently, wondering if it had been a tree branch snapping under the weight of ice. Then it came again unmistakably, a gunshot, followed by the distant sound of an engine revving high. "What the hell?" Jackson grabbed his shotgun from the rack by the door, checked that it was loaded, and stepped out into the punishing cold. The wind immediately stung his face, but decades in Wisconsin winters had conditioned him. He moved with purpose through the snow, following the faint sound of an engine struggling. As he rounded the bend in his long driveway, his headlamp illuminated a shocking scene, a black SUV overturned in the ditch, its wheels still spinning uselessly. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, mixing with the swirling snow. Training kicked in. Jackson approached cautiously, shotgun ready but pointed down. The driver's side door hung open, and a figure was attempting to crawl out, collapsing into the snow with a groan. "Hey, you all right?" Jackson called out, sweeping the area with his light, looking for any other signs of movement or danger. A woman's voice answered, tight with pain. "Help! Please!" Jackson closed the distance quickly, kneeling beside the woman sprawled in the snow. Blood stained the shoulder of her expensive-looking coat. Her face was pale beneath a shock of auburn hair. Pain etched into features that might otherwise be called handsome rather than beautiful. The face of a woman in her 50s who had aged with grace and character. "Ma'am, you're injured. I need to get you inside." Jackson swept his light across her body, assessing. "Can you tell me what happened? Was that gunfire I heard?" The woman's eyes, a striking blue, even in the poor light, darted past him, scanning the road. "They followed me, shot at me. I lost control." "Who followed you?" Jackson was already removing his coat to wrap around her, noting the professional-looking pantsuit beneath her open winter coat. "Never mind. Let's get you safe first. Can you walk if I help you?" She nodded, grimacing as he helped her to her feet. "My bag," she gasped, gesturing toward the overturned vehicle. "I need my bag." Jackson hesitated only a moment before retrieving a leather briefcase and purse from the wreckage. He quickly checked the back seat empty and scanned the area one final time. No sign of pursuing vehicles. But in this weather, visibility was near zero beyond 20 yards. As he turned to head back to the injured woman, a flash of movement caught his eye, barely visible through the swirling snow. Jackson dropped to a crouch, instinctively pulling the woman down with him behind the overturned SUV. "What?" she began, but he silenced her with a quick gesture. "Someone's out there," he whispered, peering through the gap between the SUV's crumpled hood and the snowbank. A beam of light swept across the road about 50 yards away, a powerful flashlight cutting through the blizzard. Jackson strained to see, making out the silhouettes of two figures moving methodically along the road's edge, heads bent against the wind. "They're looking for something," he murmured, "or someone." The woman's breath quickened. "We need to go. Now!" Jackson nodded, calculating. The strangers were between them and the direct path to the farmhouse, but he knew every inch of his property. "Stay low. Follow me exactly. We'll circle through the old fence line." He led her away from the road, into the deeper snow of the adjacent field. The going was difficult, especially for the injured woman, but the blizzard provided cover, obscuring their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. Jackson kept them moving parallel to the tree line, using it for orientation in the whiteout conditions. After 10 grueling minutes, they reached the back of the main barn. Jackson paused, listening. No sounds of pursuit. "Almost there," he encouraged, noting her labored breathing and the paleness of her face. Blood had soaked through his makeshift bandage on her shoulder. "Just a little further." They skirted the barn and made for the farmhouse's rear entrance. Once inside, Jackson quickly secured the door and moved through the darkened house, checking each window. No signs of the strangers. "I think we're clear," he said, returning to where the woman leaned heavily against the kitchen counter. "But they might still be searching the area. They're persistent," she managed, grimacing as she straightened up. "Lean on me," he instructed, supporting her weight as they began the slow trek to the farmhouse. "I'm Jackson Hayes. My farm is just up ahead." "Catherine," she managed through clenched teeth. "Catherine Reynolds. Thank you for helping me." "Don't thank me yet," Jackson replied grimly. "That shoulder needs looking at, and in this storm, we're on our own. Roads to town will be impassable by now." As if to emphasize his point, the wind gusted violently, nearly toppling them both. The woman Catherine stumbled, a cry of pain escaping her lips as Jackson steadied her. "Almost there," he encouraged, the lights of the farmhouse now visible through the storm. Just a little farther. By the time they reached the house, Catherine was leaning heavily against him, her breathing labored. Jackson helped her inside and eased her onto a kitchen chair, quickly building up the fire in the wood stove before returning to examine her wound. "I need to look at that shoulder," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I was a medic in Iraq. I know what I'm doing." Catherine nodded weakly, allowing him to ease off her coat. The left shoulder of her silk blouse was soaked with blood, the fabric torn where a bullet had clearly grazed her. It wasn't life-threatening, but it needed proper cleaning and dressing. "You're lucky," Jackson said, gathering his first aid kit from beneath the sink. Looks like it just grazed you. Another inch to the right. He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what that would have meant. I'm going to need to clean this. It's going to hurt. He laid out supplies with the efficiency of someone who had treated far worse wounds under far worse conditions. Catherine's eyes never left his face as he worked, her gaze analytical despite her pain. You said you're a farmer, she observed as he cut away the damaged fabric. But you move like a soldier. Was one. Now I'm a farmer, Jackson replied, carefully cleaning the wound. 3rd Infantry Division, 2 tours in Iraq. And now you're patching up strange women who crash on your property in the middle of a blizzard, Catherine said, wincing as he applied antiseptic. Your hospitality is appreciated. Jackson didn't respond immediately, focused on the task at hand. The wound was clean, a deep graze that had torn skin and muscle, but hadn't hit anything vital. Still, she'd lost blood, and shock was a concern. Who was shooting at you? Miss Reynolds, he asked finally, securing a sterile dressing over the wound. Catherine hesitated, her eyes briefly closing. When they opened again, they seemed less focused. I'm not entirely sure. Everything happened so fast. I was driving, then headlights behind me. Too close. Then the gunshots. Jackson noted the slight change in her demeanor, the shift from sharp awareness to confusion. Possible concussion, he thought, or she's not telling me everything. Well, you're safe now, he said, deciding not to press. But we should notify the sheriff once the phones are working again. Storm's probably taken out the lines already, and cell service out here is spotty at best. No! The word came too quickly, too forcefully. Catherine immediately modulated her tone. I mean, I'd rather wait. I'm not thinking clearly. Shock. Probably. Jackson studied her face. Beneath the pain and exhaustion, he detected something else, fear. Certainly, but also calculation. This woman was weighing her words carefully, despite her condition. All right, he said finally, but you need rest and warmth. I'll make up the guest room. My daughter's away at college, so you'll have privacy. He moved to a cabinet, returning with a bottle of whiskey and a glass. For the pain, medicine cabinet's a bit limited out here. Catherine accepted the glass with a nod of thanks, taking a measured sip. Your daughter, what's she studying? Agricultural economics and environmental science at UW-Madison, Jackson replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Full scholarship. She's going to revolutionize sustainable farming practices. At least that's her plan. You don't sound convinced, Catherine observed. Jackson shrugged, gathering up the bloody gauze and wrappers. It's not that. I believe in her. I just don't know if there will be a Hayes farm for her to revolutionize by the time she graduates. He hadn't meant to reveal so much to a stranger, but something about the woman's direct gaze drew the truth from him. The economy's been hard on family farms, Catherine said, her tone suggesting more than casual knowledge of the subject. It's been engineered to be hard on family farms, Jackson corrected, a rare flash of bitterness breaking through his normally stoic demeanor. But that's not your problem. Let me show you to the guest room. As Jackson helped Catherine up the stairs to the small but comfortable guest bedroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than a simple car accident. Her clothes, her bearing, the quality of her vehicle, none of it fit with the typical traveler passing through Clearwater, Wisconsin. There's a bathroom across the hall, he explained, setting her bags on an old pine dresser. Clean towels in the cabinet. I'll find you something to sleep in. Thank you, Catherine said, sinking gratefully onto the edge of the bed. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. No need for that, Jackson cut her off, uncomfortable with gratitude. Get some rest. We'll figure things out in the morning. Downstairs, after finding an old flannel nightgown of his late wife's for their unexpected guest, Jackson moved to the front window. The storm had intensified, visibility near zero, but he stared into the darkness anyway, scanning for any sign of the figures he'd glimpsed earlier. Nothing moved in the swirling snow. Still, instinct told him they were out there somewhere, searching. He checked each door and window, securing the house as thoroughly as possible before retrieving his shotgun and a box of shells from the gun cabinet in his study. He just finished loading a second weapon, a 9mm pistol he kept for protection, when he noticed Catherine's purse where he'd set it on the kitchen counter. It had fallen over, spilling some of its contents. As he moved to right it, his hand froze. Partially visible beneath a makeup compact was the unmistakable grip of a small handgun. Jackson carefully lifted the purse, confirming what he'd seen. A Sig Sauer P365 compact, high quality, and definitely not standard issue for someone who claimed to be confused about being shot at. Next to it lay what appeared to be a small electronic device with a cracked screen. Not a cell phone, but something that looked almost like a tracking device that had been deliberately damaged. He gently replaced the items, his mind racing. Whoever Catherine Reynolds was, she wasn't just a random victim. She was armed, possibly being tracked, and definitely hiding something. The question was, had he invited danger into his home, or someone in legitimate need of sanctuary? Jackson moved to the kitchen window again, staring out at the barely visible outline of his barn. The structure that had stood for over a century seemed ghostly in the blizzard, a symbol of all he was fighting to preserve. Making a decision, he grabbed his heaviest winter gear from the mudroom insulated coveralls, Arctic-rated boots, and a balaclava that would protect his face from the cutting wind. If there were strangers on his property, he needed to know more about them. He slipped out through the back door, the wind immediately stealing his breath. Visibility was less than 20 feet, but Jackson knew his land by instinct, moving confidently despite the whiteout conditions. He circled wide around the house, approaching the driveway from the cover of a woodshed. The snow had already covered any tracks that might have been left earlier, but as he neared the road, he spotted the faint glow of lights through the storm. Not the bright beams of headlights, but the softer illumination of interior vehicle lights, partially obscured. Jackson moved closer, using a line of snow-laden evergreens for cover. A dark SUV was parked just off the main road, its engine running but lights dimmed. Two men sat inside, one speaking into what appeared to be a radio or satellite phone. Military or paramilitary training recognized the sign's tactical positioning, communications equipment, the disciplined stillness of men on surveillance. These weren't random criminals, they were professionals, and they were settling in for a stakeout. Jackson retreated carefully, leaving no trail as he made his way back to the farmhouse. Whatever Catherine Reynolds was involved in, it was serious enough to warrant a professional pursuit team willing to wait out a blizzard. Sleep eluded Jackson that night. He dozed fitfully in his chair by the wood stove, the shotgun within easy reach, his mind cycling through possibilities. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world of white. The temperature had plummeted to 15 below, and a quick check of his phone confirmed what he already knew: no service, and the landline was dead. He was making coffee when Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking pale but steadier than the night before. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater that must have been in her bag, the nightgown folded neatly in her hands. "Good morning," she said, her voice stronger. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Coffee's almost ready," Jackson replied, nodding toward a chair. "How's the shoulder?" "Painful, but better." Catherine moved with the careful precision of someone managing significant discomfort. "Thank you for your care. I'm afraid I wasn't very coherent last night." Jackson poured 2 mugs of coffee, placing one before her. "Shock and blood loss will do that." He paused, then decided on directness. "Your purse fell over last night. I noticed you're carrying—" If she was startled by his observation, she didn't show it. Instead, she took a measured sip of coffee before responding. "I have a permit. I travel alone frequently. Most people with legal permits don't get shot at on rural Wisconsin roads during blizzards," Jackson pointed out, his tone neutral. Catherine met his gaze steadily. "No, they don't." After a moment's consideration, she added, "I work as a consultant for agricultural policy groups. Sometimes that means making enemies of people with significant financial interests. It wasn't a complete explanation, but it was more plausible than anything Jackson had come up with during his sleepless night. It would explain her knowledge of farming economics and her professional demeanor. Those enemies include people who would shoot at you. Apparently so, she replied, her tone dry. Though I admit, this is an escalation I didn't anticipate. They're still out there, Jackson said quietly, watching her reaction carefully. Two men in an SUV, parked just off the main road. They've been there all night. Catherine's composure slipped for just a moment, a flash of genuine alarm crossing her features before she controlled it. You went out in the blizzard. Needed to know what we're dealing with. Jackson leaned forward, his expression serious. They're professionals, military or ex-military by the looks of them, not local law enforcement, and definitely not random criminals. She absorbed this information silently, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. I've put you in danger. I'm sorry. Not your fault, Jackson replied automatically. But I need to know what kind of danger we're talking about. Who are these people? Ms. Reynolds. And who are you? Really, before Catherine could respond, the distant sound of an engine cut through the morning stillness. Jackson moved to the window, peering out at the snow-covered driveway. A county plow was making its way toward the house, followed by the familiar sheriff's department SUV. Looks like my brother's checking in, Jackson said, reaching for his coat. David's the county sheriff. Standard procedure after a big storm, making sure the outlying farms are okay. Catherine tensed visibly. Your brother is the sheriff. Don't worry, Jackson assured her, misinterpreting her concern. David's a good man. He can take your statement about last night, help figure out who was after you. I'd rather not involve law enforcement just yet, Catherine said quickly. Not until I understand better what happened myself. Jackson paused, his hand on the doorknob. You think it was someone with connections to local authorities? The question hung in the air between them, Catherine's hesitation answering more clearly than words could have. Look, Jackson said finally, I don't know what you're involved in, and maybe I don't want to know. But David's my brother. He's straight as they come. I'm sure he is, Catherine replied carefully. But the less he knows right now, the safer for everyone. Please, Jackson, I'm asking you to trust me on this. Something in her eyes, a mixture of authority and genuine concern, gave him pause. Against his better judgment, Jackson nodded. Fine, I'll tell him you're a friend who got caught in the storm, but we'll need a better story than that soon. This is a small town. People talk. Thank you, Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. I promise I'll explain more when I can. Jackson stepped out onto the porch as the vehicles pulled up. David Hayes emerged from the sheriff's SUV, tall and imposing in his winter uniform. The family resemblance evident despite his cleaner-cut appearance and the absence of the stress lines that marked his older brother's face. Jackie, he called, using the childhood nickname that only he still dared to use. Thought I'd find you buried in a snowdrift by now. Takes more than a little snow to cause trouble up here, Jackson replied, accepting his brother's brief embrace. Road's bad. County Road 8 is still closed, but Main Street's clear. Power's out in parts of town. David glanced past Jackson toward the house. Saw lights on. Figured you'd be fine with that generator Dad installed. Best investment he ever made, Jackson agreed. Coffee's hot if you want some. David stomped snow from his boots. Wouldn't say no. Jensen can finish the plow run without me for 15 minutes. As they entered the kitchen, David stopped short at the sight of Catherine, who had moved to stand by the window, coffee mug still in hand. Didn't know you had company, he said, surprise evident in his tone. Catherine got caught in the storm last night, Jackson explained, the partial truth coming easily. She was headed to Madison when the blizzard hit, offered her the guest room. David extended his hand. Sheriff David Hayes. Welcome to Clearwater, ma'am. Catherine Reynolds, she replied, shaking his hand. Your brother's hospitality saved me from a very uncomfortable night. David accepted the coffee Jackson offered, studying Catherine with the subtle assessment of a career law enforcement officer. Lucky for you, the motels in town filled up fast once the storm warnings went out. You visiting family in Madison. Consulting work, Catherine replied smoothly. I advise on agricultural policy issues. David's eyebrows rose. That's so anything that might help my big brother here keep this place going. The question, though asked lightly, carried the weight of shared concern. Jackson shot his brother a warning look. David. It's all right, Catherine interjected. Family farms are exactly the focus of my work. Actually, the challenges facing operations like yours are systemic and require policy-level solutions. Well, that's diplomatic, David commented, taking a sip of his coffee. Meanwhile, Great Land Consolidated made another offer on the Patterson place yesterday. Third farm this year they've acquired. Jackson's jaw tightened. How much? Half what it was worth 10 years ago, David replied. But the bank was calling their loans. So, he shrugged, the gesture conveying volumes about the helplessness of the situation. Catherine observed the exchange with interest. Great Land. They're one of the largest agribusiness corporations in the Midwest. Aren't they? Getting bigger by the day, David confirmed. Regional headquarters about 30 miles west of here. They've been buying up foreclosed farms all through the county. Convenient timing for them, Jackson muttered. Drought hits, banks suddenly get impatient, property values drop, and Great Land swoops in. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken only when David's radio crackled with a message from dispatch. He responded quickly, then drained his coffee. Duty calls, accident on Highway 14. So he turned to Catherine. Nice meeting you, Ms. Reynolds. If you need anything while you're in town, the sheriff's office is on Main Street. Can't miss it. As David moved toward the door, he paused, lowering his voice. By the way, Jack, there's an SUV parked just off your access road. New York plates. Occupants claim they're wildlife photographers. In a blizzard, his expression made it clear what he thought of that story. Jackson's eyes met his brother's, a silent communication passing between them. Thanks for the heads up. I'll have a deputy swing by later, David added. Just routine. Of course. After David departed, Jackson began preparing a simple breakfast, his movements efficient despite the turmoil of his thoughts. Catherine watched him from her seat at the table, her expression thoughtful. Your brother noticed them, she observed. He's observant. David doesn't miss much, Jackson agreed. Wildlife photographers. Huh. Not very creative, Catherine said with a thin smile. But it gives us some information. They're claiming a civilian cover, which means they probably aren't official law enforcement. If they were FBI or another agency, they'd have approached your brother differently. Jackson cracked eggs into a bowl with more force than necessary. You're worried about losing the farm, she observed. It wasn't a question. Jackson hesitated, then shrugged. 60 days, that's what the notice said. Pay up or get out. May I ask how much? He hesitated, then shrugged. What did it matter? $178,000, back payments, penalties, interest. 3 bad years in a row wiped out my reserves. Catherine nodded, unsurprised by the figure. And I'm guessing the bank won't consider restructuring the debt. Clearwater Savings and Loan used to work with farmers through hard times, Jackson said, stirring the eggs. Local bank, local concerns. Then Wisconsin First bought them out 2 years ago. Now it's all about the quarterly reports. And as your brother mentioned, Great Land is waiting in the wings to buy at a discount, Catherine added, connecting the dots. It's happening all over the country. Jackson placed plates of eggs and toast on the table, his expression grim. 5 generations on this land. My great-great-grandfather built this house by hand. My daughter was born in that front room, and now some corporate boardroom in Chicago decides it's all just numbers on a spreadsheet. What will you do, or fight? He said simply, taking a seat across from her. Till the last possible minute. I've got meetings with the bank manager and my attorney this week, looking at options. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the ticking of the old kitchen clock the only sound. Finally, Catherine spoke again. I'd like to repay your kindness by helping with chores today. My shoulder's sore, but I'm not completely useless. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Agricultural policy consultant knows her way around a farm. A small smile touched Catherine's lips. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Nebraska. I know which end of a pitchfork to hold. In that case, Jackson said, returning her smile with a small one of his own, I won't turn down an extra pair of hands. After breakfast, Jackson found an old coat of Sarah's for Catherine to wear and led her out to the barn. The brilliant winter sun reflected blindingly off the snow. The temperature still well below freezing, but manageable without wind. As they walked, Jackson pointed out the boundaries of the 320-acre farm, the fields now dormant under their white blanket. Corn and soybeans on the north section, winter wheat on the east, started transitioning the south fields to organic 3 years ago, specialized vegetable crops for the Madison and Milwaukee markets. Diversification, Catherine noted approvingly. Smart move. Would be, if I could complete the certification process and build the necessary relationships with buyers, Jackson agreed. But that takes capital I don't have and time I'm running out of. As they approached the barn, Jackson noticed fresh tracks in the snow, not human footprints, but the distinctive pattern of snowmobile treads, circling behind the structure and then heading off toward the county road. Someone's been here, he said quietly, motioning for Catherine to stay behind him as he cautiously pushed open the barn door. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed at first glance. The dozen dairy cows shifted in their stalls, regarding the newcomers with placid curiosity. The 2 draft horses nickered softly from their pen. But as Jackson moved toward the back of the barn where he kept his tools and equipment, he noticed something amiss. The storage cabinet's been opened, he said, examining the lock that had been expertly picked rather than broken. They were looking for something specific. Catherine moved to his side, her expression grim. Or planting something. She scanned the barn with newfound wariness. We should check everything. They spent the next hour conducting a thorough inspection of the barn and outbuildings. Jackson found no obvious sabotage to his equipment, but several areas showed signs of having been search drawers slightly ajar, items minutely rearranged. They were thorough but careful, Catherine observed. Professionals wouldn't want you to know they'd been here. Too late for that, Jackson replied, pointing to the snowmobile tracks. They must have come during the night. Couldn't risk the vehicle being seen from the house. Catherine knelt to examine a small electronic device tucked behind a feed bin, a surveillance camera no larger than a matchbox, positioned to observe the barn's main entrance. They're watching us, she said quietly, leaving the device in place. Better not let them know we found it, Jackson nodded grimly. Let's finish the chores normally. Then we need to talk somewhere. They can't listen in. They completed the morning task with practiced efficiency, Catherine demonstrating genuine skill with the animals despite her injured shoulder. To any observer, they would appear to be simply tending to the farm's needs. When they finished, Jackson led her not back to the house but toward a small workshop attached to the machine shed. Once inside, he turned on a radio, tuning it to a country music station and raising the volume slightly. Old habit from my dad, he explained in a low voice. Can't be overheard with Waylon Jennings playing. Catherine smiled faintly. Smart man, your father. They're obviously watching the property, Jackson said, getting straight to the point, which means they're waiting for something or someone. Any ideas? Catherine considered this. They could be waiting for reinforcements or for me to lead them to something. Either way, we can't stay here indefinitely. And we can't leave with them watching every move, Jackson added. Not without them following. I need to contact someone, Catherine said after a moment's thought. There's a federal judge in Madison who can help, but I can't risk using a phone or email. Any communications from this property will be monitored. Jackson weighed their limited options. There's a back way off the property, an old logging trail that connects to the state forest. It's rough going, especially in this snow, but my ATV could handle it. They wouldn't be able to follow in their vehicles. And your brother's deputy will be patrolling nearby, Catherine added. That might give us a window of opportunity while they're lying low. It's risky, Jackson cautioned. If they spot us trying to leave, they'll assume I'm running or trying to reach whatever they think I'm after. Catherine finished. But it might be our only chance to get help without leading them directly to it. The plan began to take shape between them, using the deputy's patrol as a distraction. They would take the ATV through the back trails to the neighboring property owned by Jackson's longtime friend, Walter Koenig. From there, they could borrow Walter's truck and reach Madison without being tracked. We'll need supplies, Jackson said, mentally cataloging what they would require. And we should wait until dark. I need to gather some documentation from my briefcase, Catherine added. Papers that explain, well, everything. As they finalized the details, a new sound caught their attention, the distant rumble of another vehicle approaching the farm. They moved to the workshop window, watching as a sleek black sedan carefully navigated the snow-covered driveway. Great Land, Jackson said grimly, recognizing the corporate logo on the vehicle's door. Right on cue, the sedan stopped, and two men emerged. Both wore expensive winter coats over business suits. The older man, gray-haired and distinguished, smiled broadly as Jackson approached. Mr. Hayes, glad we caught you at home. I'm Richard Vaughn, Regional Director for Great Land Consolidated. He gestured to his companion, a younger man with cold eyes that contrasted with his polite smile. This is Michael Chen, our Director of Acquisitions. Jackson didn't offer to shake hands. I know who you are, Mr. Vaughn. Your company's reputation precedes you. If Vaughn was offended by the cool reception, he didn't show it. May we come inside? We have a proposal we believe will interest you greatly. I'm in the middle of chores, Jackson replied. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Vaughn exchanged a glance with Chen, then shrugged amiably. Of course, of course. We understand how demanding farm work is never-ending. Isn't it? Without waiting for a response, he continued. Mr. Hayes, we've been reviewing the property records for Hayes Farm. We understand you're facing some financial challenges. My arrangements with the bank are private, Jackson said flatly. Naturally, Vaughn agreed smoothly. However, Great Land is prepared to make you an offer that would not only resolve those arrangements, but leave you with a significant sum. We're prepared to pay $1.2 million for the property that's nearly $3,800 per acre, well above current market value for this region. Despite himself, Jackson felt a moment of temptation. The figure was indeed above market, and would clear his debts with enough left over to start fresh somewhere else. But somewhere else wouldn't be the land his ancestors had worked, the soil that held 5 generations of his family's sweat and blood. Not interested, he said firmly. Chen spoke for the first time, his voice precise and cold. Mr. Hayes, perhaps you don't understand the situation. Wisconsin First Bank is not going to extend your loan again. The foreclosure process has already begun. How would you know that? Jackson demanded, anger flaring. Those proceedings aren't public record yet. Vaughn raised a placating hand. We have good relationships with many financial institutions. Information flows freely among business partners. In other words, the bank is feeding you information about vulnerable farmers, Jackson translated, disgust evident in his tone. We prefer to think of it as identifying mutually beneficial opportunities, Vaughn replied, his smile never wavering. Our offer is generous, Mr. Hayes, but it has an expiration date. After foreclosure begins formally, the value proposition changes significantly. Jackson took a step closer to the men, his size and military bearing suddenly more apparent. Let me be clear. This land is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone. Now I suggest you leave before you get those fancy shoes any dirtier. Chen's expression hardened, but Vaughn maintained his corporate affability. Here's my card, Mr. Hayes. When you reconsider, and you will give me a call. He placed a business card on the hood of their car. We'll be in touch. As the sedan retreated down the driveway, Jackson remained standing in the snow, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He didn't turn when he heard Catherine approach from behind. They knew about the foreclosure notice before it was public, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The bank is working with them. It's a common tactic, Catherine confirmed. Financial institutions partnering with large agribusiness corporations to consolidate land holdings. It's happening across the country. Jackson finally turned to face her. Those men, did they look familiar to you at all? Catherine hesitated, studying the retreating vehicle. No, but that doesn't mean they're not connected to what happened last night. Great Land has significant resources and influence. What exactly are you investigating? Ms. Reynolds, Jackson asked directly. And don't tell me it's just general agricultural policy. Before she could answer, Jackson's phone buzzed in his pocket, the first sign that cell service had been restored. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from suspicion to concern. It's the church, he said. Emergency meeting of the Clearwater Farmers Association tonight. Apparently, Wisconsin First is accelerating foreclosure proceedings on 6 more farms in the county. Catherine's expression turned grim. It's happening faster than I thought. What is, Jackson demanded. What do you know that you're not telling me? Catherine seemed to come to a decision. I believe what's happening in Clearwater is part of a larger pattern of coordinated land acquisition, one that involves manipulation of markets, banking regulations, and possibly illegal pressure on farmers. But I need more evidence. And that's why someone tried to kill you, Jackson pressed. If I'm right about the scale of this operation, there are billions of dollars at stake, Catherine replied. That kind of money always comes with the potential for violence. Jackson studied her face, weighing her words against his instincts. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'm going to that meeting tonight. You should come with me. Is that wise? I'm trying to maintain a low profile. This is a small town. Miss Reynolds, a new face is already noteworthy. Better to establish yourself openly as what you claim to be an agricultural policy consultant than to hide and generate more suspicion. Catherine considered this, then nodded. You're right, and I might learn something valuable. Just one condition, Jackson added. No more partial truths. If we're walking into something dangerous, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. That's fair, Catherine agreed. After the meeting, I'll tell you everything I can. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of farm work interspersed with preparation for the evening meeting. Catherine helped where her injured shoulder allowed, demonstrating knowledge of farm operations that supported her claim of a rural upbringing. By late afternoon, they had completed the essential chores and were preparing to head into town. As Jackson waited by his truck, Catherine emerged from the guest room, having changed into a professional outfit that somehow looked both appropriate for a rural community meeting and subtly authoritative. She carried a leather portfolio and had styled her auburn hair into a neat bun that emphasized the strong lines of her face. You look like you're heading into a corporate boardroom, not a church basement in Clearwater, Jackson observed. Presentation matters, Catherine replied simply. People share more with those they perceive as competent. The drive into town was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Clearwater. Wisconsin was a study in rural American decline. Empty storefronts along Main Street, faded signs advertising businesses long closed, in a general air of a community holding on by sheer determination. The only buildings showing signs of recent prosperity were the new Wisconsin First Bank branch and the county administrative offices. First Lutheran Church stood at the north end of Main Street, its white steeple a landmark visible from throughout the small town. The parking lot was already filling with trucks and practical sedans as farmers from across the county arrived for the emergency meeting. Stay close, Jackson murmured as they approached the basement entrance. Some of these folks have been hit even harder than I have. Emotions will be running high. The church basement was warm and brightly lit, folding chairs arranged in rows facing a small podium. Coffee and homemade cookies had been set out on a side table, Midwestern hospitality persisting even in crisis. About 40 people filled the room, their conversations creating a low, tense murmur. Jackson was greeted with nods and quiet acknowledgments as he found seats near the back, Catherine following closely. She observed the gathering with careful attention, noting the mix of aged farmers in well-worn work clothes and younger agricultural professionals in casual business attire. Pastor Michael Schmidt, a man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, called the meeting to order with a brief prayer. Lord, guide our community through these challenging times. Grant us wisdom in our decisions and strength in our resolve. Amen. A murmured chorus of amens followed before he continued. Friends and neighbors, we've called this emergency session of the Clearwater Farmers Association because of disturbing news many of you have already received. Wisconsin First Bank has initiated or accelerated foreclosure proceedings against multiple family farms in our county. Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. I've asked Frank Olson, whose family has provided legal services to this community for 3 generations, to explain what options might be available to those affected. A tall, thin man in his 50s took the podium, his expression grave. I won't sugarcoat this, folks. The bank is within its legal rights to call these loans. The question is why they're doing it all at once, and why now, just before planting season when they know refinancing options will be limited. Because they're in bed with Greatland, called a voice from the middle of the room. A stocky farmer in his 60s stood up, his face flushed with anger. They sent their suits to my place yesterday before I even got the formal notice from the bank. They knew sounds of agreement echoed through the room, along with similar stories. Jackson felt Catherine tense beside him as a pattern emerged. Greatland representatives appearing with offers just as foreclosure notices arrived, always with information they shouldn't have had access to. Frank Olson raised his hands for quiet. What we're describing could constitute illegal collusion, but proving it would be difficult without internal documentation from either Wisconsin First or Greatland. So we're just supposed to roll over and watch our land get swallowed up by corporate vultures, demanded another farmer. Land my grandfather broke with a team of horses. No, came a new voice, steady and authoritative. Jackson turned in surprise as Catherine stood. You fight, but strategically. All eyes turned to the stranger in their midst. Pastor Schmidt's eyebrows rose. I don't believe we've been introduced, ma'am. Catherine Reynolds, she replied, her voice carrying easily through the room. I'm an agricultural policy consultant conducting research on exactly this pattern of consolidation. What's happening in Clearwater is not unique, but it may be more aggressive than what we're seeing elsewhere. And why should we trust some outside expert, challenged an older woman near the front. No offense, but we've had plenty of consultants and experts tell us how to run our farms over the years. Catherine nodded, accepting the skepticism. You shouldn't trust me automatically. Mrs. Larson, Margaret Larson. My family's been farming here since 1892. Mrs. Larson, you're right to be cautious. But I grew up on a cattle ranch in Nebraska that my brother still operates. I understand what's at stake here because it's personal for me too. Something in her tone, a genuine connection to the land, seemed to resonate with the group. Catherine continued, her gaze sweeping the room. What you're describing, coordinated foreclosures, information sharing between banks and potential buyers. Pressure tactics follows a pattern we're seeing across multiple states. It's not coincidence. It's strategy. Frank Olson looked intrigued. You're suggesting this is orchestrated? I'm suggesting that the timing is too perfect to be market forces alone. Catherine replied carefully. Greatland has acquired over 200,000 acres across the Midwest in the past 18 months, much of it through foreclosure purchases at below-market rates. The room erupted in discussion, farmers turning to each other with worried expressions. Pastor Schmidt called for order, then turned to Catherine. Miss Reynolds, what would you recommend? Catherine seemed to weigh her words carefully. First, document everything. Every interaction with the bank, every visit from Greatland representatives, every unusual equipment failure or unexplained problem that might have contributed to your financial situation? She opened her portfolio and removed several printed sheets. Second, consider this farm bankruptcies are at a 20-year low nationally, but in counties where Greatland is expanding, they're 3 times the national average. That statistical anomaly has caught the attention of certain regulatory bodies. Jackson watched as Catherine seamlessly established herself as a knowledgeable ally to the community, providing information and suggestions without overstepping. She was good professional, credible, and connecting with the farmers through shared values and experiences. As the meeting continued, various farmers shared their situations, legal options were discussed, and a committee was formed to coordinate responses. Throughout, Catherine contributed insights that demonstrated deep knowledge of both agricultural economics and the specific challenges facing family farms. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Pastor Schmidt finally concluded the gathering with another brief prayer. As people filed out, several farmers approached Catherine, asking questions or sharing details of their situations. Jackson stood nearby, noting how effectively she balanced empathy with authority. "Your consultant friend is impressive," David commented, appearing at Jackson's side. He'd slipped into the meeting late, still in uniform. "Where did you say you met her?" "I didn't," Jackson replied. "She got caught in the storm last night. Needed a place to stay." David's eyes narrowed slightly. "Convenient timing. What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," David said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Just interesting that an expert on exactly what's happening here shows up right when things are accelerating." Before Jackson could respond, Catherine joined them, having finished her conversations with the other farmers. "Sheriff Hayes," she greeted David. "I didn't realize you were at the meeting." "Just the last part," he replied. "Interesting analysis you provided." Catherine met his gaze directly. "Just connecting dots that are already visible to anyone looking closely enough." A subtle tension stretched between them, broken when Pastor Schmidt approached. "Ms. Reynolds, your insights were most valuable this evening. I wonder if you might have time to continue this discussion. Perhaps you could join us for Sunday service and the fellowship lunch afterward. Many in our community who couldn't attend tonight would benefit from your expertise." "I'd be honored, Pastor," Catherine replied with a genuine smile, "though I'm not sure how long I'll be in the area." "Stay as long as necessary," the pastor said. "We need all the help we can get." As they drove back to the farm through the clear, cold night, Jackson finally broke the silence. "You handled yourself well in there. Those farmers don't trust outsiders easily." "I meant what I said. This is personal for me too." "So I gathered. But you still haven't told me who shot at you or why you're really here in Clearwater?" Catherine gazed out at the moonlit fields passing by. "No, I haven't, but I promised you the truth after the meeting, and I keep my promises." Back at the farmhouse, Jackson built up the fire while Catherine made coffee. The domestic routine felt oddly comfortable given the circumstances. When they were finally settled in the living room, Catherine took a deep breath. "What I told everyone tonight was true but incomplete. I am investigating the pattern of land consolidation centered around Greatland, but not just as a policy consultant." "I figured that much," Jackson said dryly. "The full truth is complicated and potentially dangerous for you to know," she continued. "But you've earned it, and you're already involved whether you want to be or not." She straightened in her chair, her posture shifting subtly to something more formal, more authoritative. "My name is not Catherine Reynolds. It's Elizabeth Morgan. I'm the current United States Secretary of Agriculture, and I'm conducting an unofficial investigation into what appears to be a massive fraud and market manipulation scheme centered around Greatland Consolidated." Jackson stared at her, processing the revelation. The U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, the actual cabinet member, was sitting in his farmhouse, drinking his coffee after helping him with chores all day. "That's not what I expected," he finally managed. A small smile touched her lips. "No, I imagine not. Why the secret identity? Why come here alone? Don't you have, I don't know, FBI agents or investigators for this sort of thing?" "Normally, Yes, Elizabeth, not Catherine, acknowledged. But there's evidence suggesting corruption within multiple agencies that would normally handle this investigation. Information has been leaking, witnesses have been intimidated, and key evidence has disappeared from official channels. She leaned forward, her expression intense. When three separate whistleblowers contacted my office with similar allegations about Greatland's operations, and then all three recanted within a week, one after a suspicious car accident, I knew something was very wrong. So you went off the grid, Jackson surmised. Became Catherine Reynolds to investigate personally. It wasn't my first choice, she admitted, but when I began asking questions through official channels, I hit walls everywhere. Someone is protecting Greatland. Someone with significant influence in Washington. Jackson absorbed this, his tactical mind already analyzing implications. The men who shot at you weren't random criminals, she confirmed. I believe they were sent to stop me from reaching a particular location, a warehouse facility about 30 miles west of here, that officially belongs to a Greatland subsidiary called Midwest Storage Solutions. What's in this warehouse? According to my informant, documentation of illegal market manipulation records of artificially depressed commodity prices in targeted regions, coordinated loan denials, and evidence of bribes to local officials to change zoning or deny permits to certain farmers. That would explain a lot, Jackson said grimly. But it doesn't explain why the Secretary of Agriculture is hiding in my guest room instead of bringing in the National Guard or whatever. Elizabeth's expression turned haunted. Because the last person who tried to expose this through official channels died in what was ruled a tragic accident. Richard Kelsey, Deputy Director of Rural Development, my friend. She paused. His car went off a bridge 3 days after he told me he had concrete evidence of Greatland's operations. The investigation concluded it was ice on the road, but Richard was the most careful driver I knew. The pieces were falling into place for Jackson: the secrecy, the gun, the damaged tracking device he'd seen in her purse. So what's your plan? He asked. Break into this warehouse, steal evidence, then do what with it? Get it to people I trust absolutely, a federal judge in Madison and a senior FBI agent who's been investigating related financial crimes. With sufficient evidence, they can initiate proceedings that even powerful people can't easily stop. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, processing the implications. And now you've involved me and potentially my entire community in what sounds like a dangerous conspiracy investigation. I never intended to involve anyone, Elizabeth said, regret evident in her voice. I was on my way to scout the warehouse location when they found me. I don't know how I was being incredibly careful. You said they're powerful, Jackson pointed out. Powerful people have resources. A comfortable silence fell between them as each considered the situation. Finally, Jackson spoke again. Why Clearwater? Why not investigate Greatland operations somewhere else? Because the pattern is most advanced here, Elizabeth explained. Your county has seen the highest concentration of Greatland acquisitions in the shortest time frame. Whatever they're doing, this is where they're doing it most aggressively. This is where the evidence will be strongest. Jackson stood, moving to the window to look out at his snow-covered fields, silver in the moonlight. His land, his heritage, threatened by the same forces she was investigating. I'll help you, he said finally, turning back to face her. Not because you're the Secretary of Agriculture, but because what's happening here is wrong, and because someone shot at you on my property, which makes it personal. Relief and something like admiration crossed Elizabeth's face. Thank you, but you should understand the risks. These people have already demonstrated they're willing to use violence. Jackson's expression hardened. Ma'am, I did 2 tours in Iraq. I've faced worse than corporate thugs. Call me Liz, she said with a small smile. If we're going to be co-conspirators, we might as well be on a first-name basis. Before Jackson could respond, headlights swept across the front of the house. He moved quickly to the window, tension returning to his frame. Car coming up the drive, not David's. Liz was immediately alert, moving to retrieve her gun from her purse. Expecting anyone, No. Jackson reached for his shotgun, checking that it was loaded. Stay back from the windows. As the vehicle approached, its high beams illuminating the farmhouse, Jackson recognized the late model sedan. Relief washed through him. It's Sarah, my daughter. Moments later, the front door burst open, and Sarah Hayes rushed in, her college backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression frantic. Dad, thank God you're okay. She threw herself into her father's arms, nearly knocking him backward. I've been trying to call for hours. Cell service has been spotty since the storm, Jackson explained, embracing his daughter. What are you doing home? You're supposed to be finishing finals this week. Sarah pulled back, her young face serious beneath her dark brown hair. Dad, I saw something on campus, a presentation by the Agricultural Economics Department. They had a special guest speaker from Great Land talking about regional consolidation strategies. They showed maps, target acquisitions. Our farm was on the list. She finally noticed Liz standing a few feet away, gun now concealed but still in hand. Who's this? Jackson hesitated, looking to Liz, who gave him a slight nod. Sarah, this is Elizabeth Morgan. She's not exactly a house guest. Sarah's eyes widened as recognition dawned. Wait, Elizabeth Morgan, as in Secretary Morgan from the Department of Agriculture. The same, Liz confirmed, extending her hand. Though I'd appreciate if you'd keep that information confidential for now. Sarah shook the offered hand automatically, her expression bewildered. What is the Secretary of Agriculture doing in our house? And why is she holding a gun? Jackson sighed, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. It's a long story, and not a particularly reassuring one, but I think you need to hear it, especially if what you saw at UW is connected. As they settled in the living room, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that things were accelerating beyond his control. His farm was in jeopardy, his daughter now involved, and he was harboring a cabinet member conducting a rogue investigation. Yet beneath his concern, a spark of something like purpose had ignited. For months, he'd been fighting a losing battle alone, watching his family legacy slip away one bank notice at a time. Now, at least, he understood he was facing not just bad luck or market forces, but a deliberate strategy to take what was his. And Jackson Hayes had never been one to surrender without a fight. Across the snow-covered fields of Clearwater, the morning sun cast long shadows where battles were fought and truths uncovered. The land still stands as it has for generations, witness to both the greed that nearly consumed it and the courage that saved it. A farmer's weathered hands run through soil made richer by the blood and sweat of his ancestors. These same hands once patched wounds and loaded weapons, now returned to their true purpose, nurturing life from the earth. The foreclosure notice that once threatened everything is now ash in the wind. In Washington, a woman who walked away from power to find truth now wields that power with renewed purpose, remembering the taste of fresh milk in a farmhouse kitchen and conversations by firelight that changed everything. Some say the modern world has no place for family farms, that progress demands consolidation. But perhaps what happened in Clearwater tells a different story, one where the oldest values prove to be our most precious resource when facing the darkest storm. The land remembers those who fought for it, and sometimes in the quiet moments between dusk and darkness, we might wonder how many battles for America's soul are being waged right now in places we've forgotten to look.